record the webinar today so that you'll be able to view it after this session. So the agenda is I'm going to start by going over the role of Mindmarker in Comcast project, just simply so Matt doesn't have to do it and you can understand what we do and give context to his presentation. But then Matt's going to go over his sales training, reinforcement, and coaching program. And we're going to finish with Q&A. So as you submit Q&A throughout the webinar, we're just going to keep track of it and then present questions at the end of Matt. And if there's questions we don't get to, we're happy to follow up with you after the webinar. So first, we're going to be doing some poll questions throughout the webinar, and I'm going to be aggregating the responses to these afterwards anonymously. So we'll be aggregating them together, and to get some insight into how you view learning reinforcement and some of your training challenges. And the first poll today is a quick one. How much training do you think employees retain a month after completing a course? Just this is again opinion. This doesn't have to be based on be based on research, but all the better if it is. I'm going to wait about 10 seconds to see if I can get as many people to respond as possible. Okay, I'm going to move to the next question before we move on, which is a longer one, and this is one where you can choose several. What are your biggest obstacles to making training stick? All right. Pick any that you think are significant for your organization. Not enough time, too many distractions, lack of reinforcement, lack of manager support, lack of practice. That's my favorite. Lack of practice, or learners that just simply don't see the value in training. That's a tough one. And then hopefully a few of you will say there's no obstacles exist. We are the perfect training organization. I'm gonna give this about 10 seconds because there's a few to read through. All right, well, looks like we're almost everyone responding. And I'm gonna end the poll. Well, I get a few more responses, let's see. Okay, so let me show you what people answered. And this is great because it allows Matt and I to customize what we speak about later. So how much training do you think employees retain? Well, the bottom line is not much. And the two who are at 50% and over, that's great. That's great. Hopefully it means that you're doing some reinforcement afterwards, or I imagine. Let's go to the next one. Let's actually, hold on. Share results. So the obstacles that people find, the winning obstacle was lack of reinforcement. Well, we're going to be able to address that today. And right after lack of reinforcement was lack of manager support and coaching. So that's interesting, Matt. That'll be an interesting point to bring up as we go into your content later, because I know that was an important piece for you and your project. Okay. Thank you, everyone. We'll just have a few more questions as we go through the presentation. So what's Mindmarker's role in the Comcast business story today? So Mindmarker solves the challenge of learning retention, because training that isn't retained, it just simply doesn't work. And we're not saying that training isn't important. We're not saying that training isn't effective, but it's intuitive that if people don't remember the training, if they don't remember what they've learned and they don't apply it or change their behavior, it's simply a waste of time. And research has shown repeatedly that as time passes from the date of training, more and more of learning is forgotten. In fact, 75 to 90% of most learning is forgotten within 1 week of the training session. And there's many reasons for this. It could be no reinforcement. There's often no measurement of whether training and learning is being retained, whether it's being understood, whether it's being applied. And as a result, there's very little ability to make adjustments because you don't have the data you need to adjust the training to make it more effective for learners in the future. And ultimately it means no behavior change, the training just isn't effective. And then COVID came through and introduced a load of new challenges that are getting in the way of learning retention. So the first is that the move to virtual training has given instructors so much less control over the learning environment. Right? Instructors are used to being able to interact with learners in whether it's a classroom training or in person, read body language to be able to focus and have informal interaction with one or two learners at a time. They're also typically able to control the learning environment so that there's no distractions. And today on Zoom, right, I'm sure half of you are on Slack right now, doing work at the same time, kids running around in the background. It's created a more difficult learning environment for many. But I think most importantly for retention, two assets that we've been able to rely on to reinforce and help reinforce training and help employees apply it is those informal moments in the office place. First with managers, right? Managers able to coach employees when they hear them, if it's sales training, if they hear them on the phone with customers, if it's unconscious bias, be able to see them interact with other employees in the office place, and to be able to stop them and say, either correct them or encourage them in how they're using the learning and the training. That's gone. Now it's much more structured, much more intimidating because it has to be a scheduled Zoom meeting. It has to be a scheduled meeting, which does not help learning retention and reinforcement. As does not help it as much as the informal moments. And then there's peer reinforcement. Peers are often one of the best sources for learning reinforcement, because if you hear one of your peers next to you parroting the training, trying to use what they've learned in training on a live customer call or in a meeting, it gives other employees confidence to try it themselves. And it gives them a sounding board and someone else to ask questions so that they feel more encouraged and they're reinforced to use and apply the training that they just came out of. But we don't have that anymore. There is no more of those casual hallway conversations or hearing a peer in the cubicle over. Both two factors that we're encountering today that are making learning retention even more difficult. So that's what Mindmarker does. We focus on learning retention. We're a technology platform that takes your existing training content and learning programs and converts them into a learning reinforcement program where we are able to send messages to learners that increase learning retention and help increase behavior change. And how we do it is, at the core, it's a messaging platform. And we're able to send small micro-learning messages to learners throughout their learning journey. And what this means is this is small, very consumable messages, we recommend usually between 30 to 90 seconds in length, that we send to learners at very prescribed intervals that are designed to maximize retention of the learning. And the type of interactions can be very varied depending on the type of training and the program. But what's unique is that we engage learners by making it a two-way interaction. That means you as a training organization can send content, whether it's reminders, supplemental information, tasks, pre-training workshop materials that you're pushing to a learner. But we also engage the learner by asking them to contribute back. Respond to quizzes, respond to assessments, share their opinion, reflect on how effective the training has been, so that we're able to engage learners and improve upon the reinforcement of the learning and training program. And the best uses of Mindmarker, some of our most innovative customers use us throughout the entire learning journey. And it starts with preparing learners for training, whether it's pre-training materials or just giving them insight into what's about to come so they can be excited and motivated to learn. Reinforcing training during and after the training through that two-way interaction. But the last 2 points are one of the most powerful pieces of Mindmarker, is that we're able to adapt a message program based on the needs of each learner. So that can be as simple as one learner who is demonstrating that they're not grasping content and they're struggling. They might need a different type of learning program to help really reinforce that content they're struggling with. We have the ability to take those learners down a different path. At the same time, if you're going to have those learners who they get it, they've mastered the content, you want to challenge those learners. You want to keep motivating them to learn more and to apply what they've learned. And so you want to give them a different path. And then it can be as simple as a preference for what language they want their reinforcement program in, or what type of media. Are they more of a visual learner with video versus a written reading texts and emails? And then Mindmarker gives insight into learning retention that most people have never had before, right? Be able to see, are employees engaging in the reinforcement program? Are they retaining the content, and are they understanding the content, and are they willing to apply it, and have they apply it? I mean, this insight allows you to improve upon your current reinforcement programs as well as improve future reinforcement programs. And it gets us to the point you can start to analyze whether this training is truly effective, because you can look into whether people are actually applying it and changing their behavior. So the impact is really impressive. And what a Mindmarker messaging program can do is essentially reset the Ebbinghaus curve. And the Ebbinghaus curve is here on the left-hand side. It's that curve of how much learning do employees retain over time. Every time an employee receives a Mindmarker or engages in a Mindmarker learning reinforcement program, we're essentially resetting the memory curve, resetting the forgetting curve, so that if we're able to do that reinforcement over a sustained period of time, learners are going to retain more and more and more of that training and be more likely to apply it. And as a result, you get learners that are much more engaged in learning, you get higher learning retention, and the ultimate result we want is higher behavior change and application of new skills. And we're going to focus today on Comcast Business. And their sales training example. And it's a great example because sales training is one where you can measure. There's a lot of KPIs that you can track effectiveness to. But this is effective for all sorts of different types of training, from diversity, inclusion, and unconscious bias training, to leadership training, to very specific customer service, product training, safety training, onboarding. The fundamentals that you're going to hear Matt talk about and the techniques they used for learning reinforcement are applicable to any of these programs. So if you're a learning and development professional, I encourage you to listen to what Matt goes through to find those techniques he used that you can use are applicable to any of these other programs, because that's what I thought was so interesting about his story, is that it didn't just appeal to a sales training use case, it was to a broad set of use cases. As we leave Mindmarker, I can see that a number of our customers are on with us today. Mindmarker does this for some of the biggest customers, biggest companies in the world. I see on the webinar today, we have Cisco, we have Discover, we have Amway, Korn Ferry, Visa, Cummins, some of the biggest companies that are using Mindmarker today. And we're excited to have you and look forward to Matt's presentation. And if you liked what you saw today, what you see today out of Matt, we're going to have a webinar in 2 weeks, in that we've invited Celine Mullins, who's a PhD in psychology and the founder of Adaptive Training, to come on with one of our lead instructional designers, who's also a professor at University of Tampa, to talk about learning reinforcement in this new era of remote workers. It's going to be a roundtable discussion. It's going to be a great event. I encourage you, you can go to our website, mindmarker.com, and register today. So before we get to Matt, we're going to do our second set of poll questions. So let's go to the third poll question. All right, this is a quick one. What percentage of training time do you spend on learning reinforcement? All right, this is a tough one because you could be a percentage of total time someone's sitting through learning material. So how much of that is dedicated to after the event and reinforcement? I'm going to give us about 10 seconds to get as many people to reply as possible. All right, I'm going to end the poll here. And let's go to the second one. This is a little more involved. You can respond with multiple answers. What techniques do you use for learning reinforcement today? All right. This is not a new problem. So you could say none. Everything's where we don't use anything today. There's refresher courses, right? Those are very common. Take-home materials, reinforcement messaging, like we were talking about with Mindmarker, coaching from managers and peers. I'm going to give about 10 seconds, since there's a few to read through, and then I'll share the results with everyone. All right, looks like everyone has responded. Let's see what people said. Time spent on reinforcement. So the majority is 0 to 25%. Interesting. Well, it could be bad or it could be good depending on how much of it is in these small snippets like we're talking about with mind markers, right? If it's a number of small interactions versus a 2-day classroom training. Let's go to the next question. Share the results. So the winner here, what techniques do you use for learning reinforcement today, was refresher courses, getting people back in the classroom. That's interesting. So, I'll be interested if Matt discusses it later, or when we talk with Gunja and Celine next week on how prevalent refresher courses are and how effective they are in learning reinforcement. But great. Hey, thank you everyone for responding to those results. And we will move on to Matt. So Matt's going to talk about his project and their learning reinforcement for an inside sales team. And before he gets on, I just want to take a moment so you all know about Matt. And what I found most, Matt is director of inside sales strategy at Comcast Business. He's been there for almost 4 years. What I found most interesting about Matt's history is he's actually sold. He's been on the phone. He's picked up a phone and had to be a sales rep. And then he's gone on to be in leadership roles and in sales enablement. He has a long history in sales and sales enablement. He's a member of the American Association for Inside Sales Professionals. He's a board member. And what I found most interesting about Matt, we've talked at length about, is his 9 years in professional basketball. And if anything, Matt, this can at least inspire a flood of LinkedIn views, because I don't want to add any more material color to that. So you get a nice influx of LinkedIn views on your profile this week.
Thanks, Rob.
With that, Matt, I'm just going to hand it over to you and mute myself.
Awesome. I appreciate it, Rob. And
sure.
One thing during this time of COVID that I realized is it's time to update my headshot, as I went with the quarantine head shave. So it's on my to-do list, and appreciate the nice intro. And the one thing I want to make clear is I am about 5'9" with a vertical leap of out of a dozen inches or so. So the 9 years in professional basketball was part of the ticket sales team and running those teams. So I did not play, although I wish I could have. But appreciate it, Rob, and excited to talk to everyone about some of the issues that we faced with training, the big project we took on, and then how we came to the point where we knew we needed to reinforce this and how Mindmarker played into that. So Rob, if you want to flip to the next slide, I'll kind of walk through kind of how we got to where we are. So within Comcast Business over a few years ago, we sort of hit this point where the business was growing. We were adding new and exciting products to the portfolio that our inside sellers had. With that, huge opportunity, but also a lot of challenges. We went from an organization selling our 3 core products that I'm sure everybody's aware of to 9, soon to be 10, and I'm sure that number is going to keep growing. We implemented a new sales process, the professional selling skills from Miller Heiman. But with that, it was also a new sales mentality or sales philosophy. We went from the ability and the mindset of a transactional type inside seller to moving to this collaborative, customer-centric focus. It's not overly difficult to find out if a customer needs 1 or 2 or 3 of 3 products, but 9, that needs a really strong collaborative conversation. So we had these 2 things we had to change at the same exact time. Our sales world is roughly 1,000 folks, including our front line and second line sales leaders. So we had to train all of them over the course of a few months and then immediately put that training into action. One of the things we are looking at is how we do this is a 2-day session, call it 12 hours of training, is a lot of material to give anybody, and then expect there to be some expertise in that and put into action. So we saw some gaps. So Rob, if you look at the next slide, I'll kind of walk through some of the things that we found from both my personal in previous roles of some issues with training, and then things that have happened in some of our other trainings. We not only had to teach our team these new skills and concepts, but we had to make sure that it stuck. Completely changing a sales process or sales philosophy is tricky. There's very easy to slip back into old habits. I won't say bad habits, but old habits. The other thing as we're going through this training is it sticking? Is it working? What's the data behind it? Can we look into what's actually happening? And then last, and probably in our minds, one of the most important things was our frontline and second line leaders are also being trained on this new process. How do we help them? How do we empower and develop them to then develop their reps? And that was a big thing, and it'll be a theme as I go through some of these slides of what we looked into. So that's what we knew. Now on to sort of how we set this up. You know, once everyone went through training, we had to find a way to do two things. One, our standard reinforcement training sessions. I know the poll of reinforcement that everyone weighed in on, there's some refresher classes, there's your standard weekly trainings, and we did all that, and it was great, and it helped, and we had it mapped out with the help of the Mindmarker team. And then how can we put into play, training is 2 days. Our training program with this went for 6 months. So what I'll walk through in the next couple of slides is what those 6 months look like. What happened when our team left their 2-day training session? As Rob moves on to the next slide, I'm going to kind of walk you through what that looks like for us, right? So one of the most important things, again, is giving your leaders the ability to learn, and then the ability to put that into action. So when we designed our reinforcement program for our sales leaders, the things that we wanted to look at was, one, how do they understand their team's knowledge and their own knowledge? So they were asked basic poll questions. There was no right or wrong answer in these reinforcements. It was, how do you feel your team's comfort level is in identifying a good open to a phone call? How do you feel your ability to identify a good openness? So we gathered their knowledge. The next thing we did is we tested their understanding of the skills and the concepts. And then lastly, and again, to me, it was the most important thing, you thought about how your team understands it. We tested you on how you understand it. And then what we did is we gave them tasks that fit into their normal day-to-day. So as they were coaching their team, what they did is we gave them questions, we gave them scenarios to work into their coaching sessions. And then what they had to do for us was then reply back how it went, what they uncovered, what was surprising. And with that, we also provided them with a call transcript or a 30-second call clip focused on one particular sales skill. And they had to choose, is this good and why, or is this incorrect and why? So at the end of their reinforcement journey, they assessed themselves and their team, they learned, they put it into action, and they were able to identify what good sounds like. So we took that and then we built on to what would come next and how we developed the program. That was with our leaders. So we reinforced our leaders over 6 months with 2 or 3 mind markers a week. The tasks that I mentioned before, they stretched out over the course of a week or 2 until they had to give us some feedback on it, knowing everybody's schedule is a bit different. But as we're reinforcing our reps, we were lucky to come across a few things that helped us as well. We were able to monitor our reps' calls using a really exciting program that uses AI software to pick up keywords, key phrases that we taught the tool to identify. This helped us understand, one, is this training started to stick? Are we using the language? Are we using the right philosophies? Are we approaching calls the right way? That, with a combination of Mindmarker, we're able to sort of identifying a scoring or a rating system of who needs additional reinforcement and where, and then who are our outliers? Who are the leaders in this? Who can we lean on? Who can we take call clips from to share with the rest of the team? And with that, we're providing a vice president and SVP with data on, here's how your leaders are doing, here's how your sales reps are doing, and here's our follow-up plan. I think all this data that we're receiving on a daily basis is great, and I know maybe for you guys sometimes overwhelming. We had a plan in place what to do with that data. So we knew whoever fell below the accepted line of their Mindmarker score, their understanding, there were supplemental huddle sessions. There were supplemental call review sessions. One-on-ones with their supervisor was geared towards what they needed help with. So we're able to give specific coaching and specific feedback on where they needed it to help them go from step 1 to step 2. One of the mistakes that I've run into in my career with sales training is putting everybody through the same and judging everyone through the same process and having people go from step 3 to 4 before they understand step 3. And it just puts them behind the 8 ball. So with this combination of daily reminders and daily feedback and daily check-ins, we're able to identify where people are and how they're progressing. The next thing I want to talk about as we go through our program, Robin, I think there's some key insights on the next slide, is now that we did all this, what were we looking for? And this is where we started our program with. And we spent hours and hours and hours, and I believe Jenny James is on the webinar, and she was so invaluable from the Mindmarker team in helping us take our goals and helping us create our program that aligned with our goals. So the number one thing, and we mentioned it early on in one of the polls that Rob put out, is coaching effectiveness and how we help our leaders coach better. Again, I mentioned before, we help them give specific coaching sessions. Not every rep needed the same exact reinforcement, but we were able to find that out through Mindmarker. It wasn't a guess by any means. In there, with the increased coaching, we can never be there unless our supervisors and managers understand what they're looking for and understand the process, right? So being able to give them support along with the reps was invaluable to us through this process. When you have 1,000 sales reps, making sure your leaders are empowered and have the skills to reinforce this was key. There's a small metric here that I want to just expand on a bit, so it puts some context to it. As I mentioned, we went from 3 to 9 products. For us, this is a big deal. Having our reps understand how to have a collaborative conversation helps them understand that you can't just offer things. You need to find out what a customer's needs are and how you can satisfy that with what we're able to offer. And it's different for everybody. And for us, a small increase of 10% nets us multi-million dollars in additional monthly revenue. And that's our goal. Our goal is, how do we simultaneously increase the money coming in, which to every business, obviously that's the goal. But just asking a sales rep to do that, putting that in a sales rep's mind, it's too big for them. So we broke it down for them. A small increase in the number of products you sell per month nets you, personally, X amount of dollars in commission. And that ties into our big picture. And it's a small increase. And that was our goal. Through coaching, through making sure reps were reinforced and up to speed and able to put this into play, got us to our goal. And luckily, I'll knock on my desk here that it keeps going. And then lastly, as we look through this, I know, and I'm prepared, that this is not going to be our last massive training or new initiative. And the work we're able to do with Mindmarker and reinforce this massive change and training, this helped us set a plan in place for what happens next. The next thing that we do, it's almost plug and play. We know the structure. We know how we're going to reinforce our teams. We know how they're going to get their reinforcement, and we know what to look for and how to plan for it. So that was a very nice secondary benefit of going through this whole program, was how we set ourselves up for future success. Thanks, Robin. I think we have, perfect, great. Through this, and a couple of things I wanted to make sure that I pass along about we call it our Mindmarker journey. And that's how we talked through our sales reps and sales leaders. Through their career at Comcast, they're going to sit through 100, 200 hours of classroom training. We really are high on trainings. But when we sat them down and rolled this out, this was a journey. This was 6 months until the first phase ends. And then after 6 months, we just continued to reinforcement as we would normal training. But we had to make sure that stuck. Once you leave your classroom session of the 2 days, this isn't over. And I mentioned a few times this concept of understanding the data and putting it in action. We knew where we wanted to go. The data helped us get there more specifically. We knew how to design things based on what we were seeing. And none of the data that we got, we didn't reprimand anybody for not understanding. We just gave them additional support. And the folks that were really grasping it, we wanted to know why. And did it translate into their calls, and can we use that as examples? And I think for the fourth time, maybe through this last few minutes, I mentioned sales leaders and developing our sales leaders is critical. Making sure that they understand that there's support there for them. Their reinforcement was double. It was the sales concepts, the sales philosophy, the sales process, but it was also how to coach better, how to read data and put that into your coaching, and knowing that the support was there for them. So at the end of the day for us, these were what we found out, and this is how we judged if this was a success for us. And overwhelmingly, the answer was yes. That is our long journey of Mindmarker, and as brief as I could make it. I begged Rob for 3 hours to talk through a lot of this. He laughed every time I asked. Just the one thing I wanted to close with before, I know he has a few questions to ask, but for us, we've learned that any training that we put out must be reinforced. If we just get a few percent more understanding of a key concept, it's a major win for us. So we're going to continue down this path of reinforcement, whether it's with new products, whether it's a new system, even up to HR rollouts. Everybody has a chance to learn. Everybody has a chance to learn again. Everybody has a chance to be reinforced again. And the one last thing I wanted to mention, if anyone on the call has a sales organization, a sales team, or anybody who's every second they spend during the day is geared towards making money. For us, taking time out of a sales rep's day or a sales leader's day equates to missed money or missed opportunities for them. And that's how they look at a lot of this. But when we were to show them that this 6 months journey was no more than 90 seconds a day of reinforcement, I mean, it takes longer to make a Keurig cup of coffee than it does to take a Mindmarker. So that really helped push our message over our 6 month journey. So that's my quick wrap up. Rob, I'll pass control back over to you. Appreciate it.
And Matt, we're going to go through quite a bit of questions here because there's a lot of practitioners here on the phone, right? People who are doing the training and doing these programs in place. So there's a lot of detail. You were really good in giving a high level overview so that you would fit inside the little constraint I gave you, but we're going to give you a chance to go into some details on the actual program with some of these questions.
Happy to.
And hey, so this is our final poll. I just have one poll question. Let me pull it up. So this is about training effectiveness, right? How do you measure training effectiveness today? I provided a few here. Course completion rate, like did they complete the course? Do you use assessment scores, manager feedback, employee feedback? Do you have business KPIs? Like here, Matt showed one. Their KPI was to increase products per sale, or one of their many. Or you use different measures altogether. You can pick multiple. I'm going to give you a few seconds for people to reply. And we still have votes coming in, so we'll let it ride for a few more seconds. And I will end the poll and show you the results here. So what did people say? The number one was measuring by course completion rate, right? And that's very common, and I find because it's often the one metric that's easiest to get, right? So, but soon after that is assessment scores. So it's great. I'd love to see, be interesting to see how much this changes to business, moving to business KPIs and other measures in the coming years. So we're going to go into Q&A now. So if you have questions for Matt, enter them in. And JR, I'm going to start with my own. So hey, Matt, one of the questions we get quite a bit, anytime, especially with sales reps who to stereotype and characterize, having been a sales rep myself at one point, you have a lot of demands in your time. You have numbers you have to hit. Going through a training program, dealing with mind markers. So it's something that doesn't always get priority. Hey, how did you motivate them, or give them motivation, or maybe make it a standing operating procedure for them to embrace this training and engage in the mind markers?
Yeah, it's a great question. As I was wrapping up, I talked about this concept of our reps thinking every minute we're off a phone call, was an opportunity they were missing or money they were missing. We got the support of our executive team, and when it was rolled out, the messaging was, we understand that they got taken off out of their money-making time and into a 2-day session. And the whole concept around it was, this is so important that the 2 days we understand is a sacrifice, but we're going to push this out all the way through 6 months and continue to help reinforce. The benefit of giving some extra love to your sales leaders was that they were bought in first. They understood that by their team doing these reinforcements, the sales leaders get additional insight into their reps, which allows them to coach more specifically, which allows them to drive specific results, depending on where they stood with it. The other thing that helped too was we used the desktop version of Mindmarker. We have all inside sellers. They were all at their desks all the time. We didn't get into the mobile app, which would have been very helpful. But what we did is we alerted them every morning or every day that they had a Mindmarker that they had one. And if they missed it, they got a reminder. There was no penalty. We just didn't want them to get past 1 week of their Mindmarkers. But what our leaders did, because they were so bought in, is that they would have their morning get together or their midday training session. And before they started, before they came to the session, the note went out that, let's everybody hop on. The next 5 minutes are Mindmarker dedicated. 5 minutes was blocked off. You really only need between 30 and 90 seconds. A few times we added a call clip that lasted 30 seconds, and then we gave them another 30 seconds to answer. So having our leaders bought in, got their reps to be bought in, and then we got to see the data from it. So there was multiple levels of people who were understanding the importance of it. And kudos to our leadership team for driving this top down.
And Jared's going to have a few here in a moment, Matt, but hey, do you mind elaborating? You and I talked about it a bit yesterday, but I thought was really innovative was the artificial intelligence. Maybe you could pause a bit and elaborate on, because we're always trying to, all right, big picture for the audience, we're always trying to tie training to behavior change, right? But one of the biggest challenges is how do you measure that behavior change? Because you can't see it often. You're not there when someone is interacting with somebody else. And you, because you're an inside sales team, you have the advantage of this call of the call system. You were able to use that to analyze behavior change. I wonder if you could to elaborate on what you did.
Yeah. I think this comes in some of the key learnings that we had during this process. And this has been 18 months, give or take of this journey. I'm actually coming up on 2 years. We understood how we wanted to get our teams to understand the concepts and understand this change we were making. At the end of the day, a sales process, no matter what industry you're in, is fairly similar. We all see a lot of the same concepts and philosophies. To get our group to change from transactional to collaborative, it was a major shift. So the training plus Mindmarker helped change the behaviors and get the concepts understood and be able to put into play. Part two, the trickier part, now that we know who's doing, how each person's progressing, how our teams are progressing, how do we inspect that? We have sales leaders who have 10 or 12 reps reporting to them. That's a lot of calls to listen to and to monitor. So we're able to partner with a program that uses artificial intelligence to monitor our calls. So we said, this is what we wanted to look for. And simply, it would listen to our calls and it would report back on either key phrases, key questions. We call them buzzwords that we wanted our reps to lean on. And also on the flip side, things we don't want them to say. And things we don't want them to say at certain points of a call. To give you a good example, a rep could understand every new concept that we have to offer. Mindmarker could have helped to reinstill that and then made it part of their process. But if they're not putting into action the right way, that's our secondary part that we have to make sure we inspect. So we want our reps to understand, to talk about price and the products and how that solution works, but not in the first minute of the call. So we train them, we reinforce it so they got the concepts, and this part two of this call monitoring was to understand what was happening. And with some of the data we got from Mindmarker, we were able to say, okay, Matt's shortcomings are these 3 skills. When we listen to our calls, we're going to focus on those. And the flip side, if Rob's really nailing these open-ended, strong questions, let's make sure we listen to that and help replicate that with other folks. So the AI call monitoring was part 3 of our training reinforcement.
And I have another question, but JR, if you come in here in a moment, stop me. But here, let me ask, and hey, JR, do you have any good ones from the audience?
Actually, I do. I have people are engaging quite a bit in the Q&A. So yeah, go ahead. I mean, yeah, I'm looking at the time. We still have some time, but yeah, we do have some great questions coming up.
Why don't you go ahead, JR, and ask one, and then I can always jump in with mine.
Absolutely. All right, let me go ahead and take a look in here. So the first one is, why didn't you choose to go with, your own authoring tool and LMS, and then, have your own IDs focus on the metrics, and do their own reinforcement? Why you chose Mindmarker, I guess. Somebody wants to know the difference between why can we do it ourselves, versus coming to someone like Mindmarker. Can you share your experience on that?
Yeah, there are a few things. There are 3 main things that we wanted out of this reinforcement. The second we saw the content, it's a lot. So we knew we needed a reinforcement. We knew we wanted something that wasn't 100% gamified, but we wanted to have some aspects to it. So some aspects of that it looked fun, okay? The second one was we wanted different types of reinforcement. We didn't just want to ask yes or no or multiple choice questions. They're valuable, but we didn't want that to be the sole point. And then the one that really, really made us 100% lean in here was the back-end analytics, the dashboards that were provided, and the insights that we got. We sent out weekly updates, and what they really were was, here's what your team learned, here's what was given to them, and here are the results. And again, because we didn't just have multiple choice, we had this array of feedback. One was, well, Matt rated himself a 5 out of 5 in understanding the concepts. However, Matt scored 0 out of 5 in his skill questions, and then he wasn't able to pick out what good sounds like from these 2 call clips. So there's a gap there. We were able to show that down to a rep level, to a team level, and to our national SVP of, here's what's happening. We spent X amount on this sales program and the sales training. Now through this and the different ways we're able to look in on what we're doing, we're able to justify a lot and then customize a lot. So those 3 things for us is, that's what we were looking for in a program. And again, this nailed everything. And that's why we decided that this was going to be our reinforcement to our training session.
Awesome. Appreciate that. The next questions we have in here, how long approximately took you guys to build the program or to prepare for, the entire program?
Yeah, I'm smiling a bit because I'm maybe too detailed with things at times. And again, we started with our goals in mind. Everything that we put in place had to go back to those goals. So we did quite a bit of customization to our program. And we walked slowly with it at first. It was, that important to us. So it took, I'm going to say, a month, give or take. And that's only because I did some hyper focused edits. And again, we added in call clips. We added in call transcripts. So that added to the time of development. But the good part was our program translates across all of our reps. We only do it once. And once we created it, it's what goes into place for new hires when they come in, because the concepts are all the same. The examples are all the same. So hopefully no major changes in our business in the coming months. We can keep the program intact.
Excellent. All right. On the same note, did you make any types of adjustments to any of the mind markers that learners receive, during the program? Did you realize, okay, we're going to have to tweak this content, or we're going to have to go back to the drawing board, and and how difficult was that?
So it was not very difficult at all. And that's a kudos to the Mindmarker team who helped with us. No, we made very few. Again, the one thing I mentioned is we had some of the questions geared towards sales leaders. So we were asking them to incorporate what they were learning into their coachings and then reporting back to us. We just had to tweak some of those scenarios. So one, they were more meaningful, and then that the feedback that we got from them, we could put into action quicker. And then the last one was the way we asked we called them assessment questions. Essentially, how do you assess yourself? How do you assess your team if you're a leader? We made those a bit more specific as we got on, as we realized that asking someone how they feel about their comfort level in a particular sales skill, it's kind of a vague answer. So we would ask specifically around, Matt, how do you feel about how to open a call? And then we would ask how they felt about each skill involved in that process. So we got a little bit more feedback on it.
Perfect. And another one is a very good one, actually. Did any of your sales managers go through a separate Mindmarker program that alerted them, to what their reps were going through? Kind of like a supplemental program.
So they had separate programs. So our leaders used a leader-specific Mindmarker, and our reps use a rep-specific Mindmarker. A lot of the questions crossed over, especially the skill-based questions, but the leader one, they were listening to calls, they were putting things into action a slightly different way. So the feedback that we got through the analytics that Mindmarker provides, a leader would essentially get two sets of data. They would get how their team is doing and who they should focus on and why, how they were doing, and then their leader could help them make sure that they are following the right path. The only additional session that they went through is we put them through a day and a half on coaching. So they learned the new process, they took the reinforcement, they started working with their teams, we saw a gap of coaching, and we put in a coaching training. And then that's when they got their secondary Mindmarker with some of these coaching questions and coaching applications in it.
Excellent. Great
and I
use.
think for them, JR, just expand just a slight, I think for them, and I mentioned earlier, they just felt that they were getting additional support, that they weren't just lumped in with their team learning, that they got some extra help, extra focus, extra insight. It just helped with their development and their buy-in to the whole process.
Yeah, definitely a good model to follow for anybody out there, trying to do the same. Indeed, it's a very, very good approach.
Really helped.
All right, another question here. I think it's the last one we have in the Q&A for now is somebody says, you had the great opportunity to review AIs to see what keywords were being used. With our outside sales reps, this wouldn't be possible, and coaching ops aren't as often as we would like, especially now, obviously. Any suggestions you have for them?
Yeah, we are lucky that we have the call systems that we have for inside sellers. And I come from the outside sales world, so a lot of the inside stuff was new to me when I started. And everybody has their different ways to follow, whether it's sitting in on meetings with their sales reps. But this is, for us, this is where Mindmarker can come in. If I'm not sitting with my rep on their calls, if I'm not sitting with them in sales meetings, if they're outside and I'm inside as a seller, this gives, again, just additional insight into how they're grasping the concepts. And again, if you spend the time to develop a program specific to what you need, this is where having them figure out what good sounds like. Or one of the options that we didn't use, we didn't want to take up too much time based on the number of things we added in, but having them record something and add it in, having them record and send it to their leader, just where Mindmarker could help in this scenario is getting a pulse of what your reps are doing and what they understand. Now, there's still time that you need to inspect it, but this gives some insight into how they're thinking about things. Do they understand what it's supposed to sound like? Can they articulate what they're listening to? And that's where the free text box questions really helped us. Is we got specific answers, and then we got kind of how they're processing some of this. So all that, again, would help with additional coaching, especially for outside sellers. So I wish there was an easier answer where this translated into some sort of recording system when they're out in the field. But just the additional insight into coaching is, I think, where that could play in here.
All right, thank you. All right, back to you, Rob.
And yeah, Matt, I have a question, or something I'd like you to elaborate just a little bit more on.
Yeah, sure.
I think what's really interesting about this program, right, is that you have multiple for managers. You took the time after training to now almost make the training, take it up a level. You had multiple streams for managers as one for reps. You and I had spoken about how often these trainings rely on managers to be experts in the training, right? They go through the training and they might even have their own specific day session, but then you expect them to be able to be experts on it so that they can do what we talked about before. Coach reps, help them through it. But you had told me that I like to bring that up because you said this was an iteration of how you came to this, because you found that your your sales leaders, you're asking too much of them to be able to do that without more help.
Yeah, no, thanks for bringing that up. When we set up the very, very first session of, this is our new philosophy and training program, the sales leaders and the reps went through the initial 2 days of content together. And as we looked through it, we saw the gap there is we're putting so much emphasis on our leaders to get their teams better when everyone learns differently and at different speeds. And if we're putting the pressure really on our sales leaders to be the experts, we need to make sure we're giving them the support to be the expert. So the first wave of this rollout, we caught that. And that's how we came to this secondary mind marker for our leaders. Let's not just get our leaders at the same pace as our sales reps, but let's get our leaders thinking as leaders. Learn the concepts, learn how to pick out what good sounds like, learn how to put into action, and then learn how to take your reps' strengths and or weaknesses and put it in and make your coaching session specific. So, going into it, knowing that this is a major project and that there's going to be areas where you need to twist and tweak, and that was one of them. Make sure the leaders are given enough support to be able to support their teams. Or else you're going to have two people who don't understand the same concept trying to figure it out on their own, and we don't want to see what kind of results come from that. So having our leaders support it, having them given a track that's leader specific really helped them understand what they needed to know and how to teach that or how to put that in place with their teams. And it was a major change and a really huge, a beneficial one as this whole progress went on. Again, this was 6 months. So making a change early on didn't derail us at all.
And hey, Matt, what was the ultimate feedback from reps and leaders? Because I anytime you ask a sales leader that you're going to ask more of their reps, it's usually the biggest form of pushback, especially if you ask a sales leader to do the program as well. Hey, what was the overall feedback from them?
So I'll say most. I won't say all. Most people are either afraid or don't like change, and we knew that going in. When you have 1,000 sales reps, there's going to be a few that push back. The thing, again, that helped, once some leaders had buy into Mindmarker, whether or not you were resisting the change, every day or every other day, you were being reinforced on these new concepts. And they were the topics of your training sessions. They were topics of your one-on-one sessions. So it never went away. So the constant discussion about it, it weaved into their normal day-to-day life. The benefit was it takes a minute a day to get it done. That's great. But then we were able to give that rep specific feedback to them. Hey, Matt, I know you're kind of struggling with some of these new concepts, but you're doing really well here. Here's one area where we need to focus on a little bit better. Let's listen to this call from Rob, and let's see how he puts it into practice. So it never went away. With a 2-day session and then maybe just weekly group training sessions, that's going to start to fade away. And the resistance to put that into practice just goes up and up and up. So we try to shorten that curve of people fighting the change. Asking someone to do an hour a day of reinforcement, never going to happen. A minute, that's less time than it takes to get your coffee brewed. So we got their buy-in to it. It was quick. It was digestible. It was easy. And they got feedback on it that went into play. So it wasn't, good job, Rob. You got 9 out of 10. Thumbs up. It was, 9 out of 10 right. Here's what happened. Here's what we saw. Here's how I want to focus our next one-on-one. So it was never out of the conversation.
That's great. That's great. Well, Matt, we're at the end of I'll be really interested to hear how the next generation, because, as you're always improving this, we'll probably want to have you back some point to hear what you're doing next, because this is a really innovative application of the Mindmarker technology. So I appreciate you coming in.
No problem. It really helped. It was easy. And I think the flexibility to create it the way we needed it was really helpful. So I appreciate it. Appreciate being able to speak to everybody. Thanks for taking time out to listen. And thanks. And hopefully we'll talk soon.
Sure. And hey, to everyone, if you have questions, feel free to email me after this. Again, on our homepage, you can sign up for the next webinar. And if you're interested in a replay, I will be posting it shortly on mindmarker.com. All right. Hey, thanks, Matt. Thanks, JR. And thanks, everyone, for attending.
Thanks,
And
Rob.
hopefully we'll see you
Thank
again
you,
soon.
everyone. Thanks, Matt.